meeting for Wednesday, June 26, 2019. It is 4 o'clock, and we'll start off with roll call. Identify if you are present. Mark Nelson?
Here.
Steve Corey? Here. Dave Neal?
Here.
Megan Larson?
Here.
Scott Walters?
Here.
And then for ex officio members, Councilwoman Genesis Malam and Rochelle Klein.
Present, thanks.
Quorum being present, we will move on to approval of the agenda. Are there any comments or motions in relationship to the agenda?
Mr. Chair, I would move to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved as written. Further comments? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote, all those in favor of approving the agenda as written signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. Thank you. Next is consideration of the draft minutes for the May 22nd meeting. Are there any comments on the draft?
Mr. Chair, I would move that we approve the minutes as written. Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the draft minutes for the May 22nd meeting be approved as written. Further comments? Since the commission is ready for a vote, all those in favor of approving the minutes as written signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? The motion passes. Thank you. Next on the agenda is community acknowledgement, and first I would be very deficient if I did not profusely thank Meg for going ahead and chairing our booth at the Public Works Expo. It went extremely well, and I was very pleased with the whole event. Thank you for those that helped us have the booth. Thank you, Republic Services, for the swag and the use of Conrad to go ahead and inform the public on the proper way to recycle. We had numerous people stop by and ask questions. It's a wonderful opportunity for us to reach out to the public and explain recycling. And there's always new people in the valley, so there's always new people asking questions. So again, thank you, Meg, and thank you all. Next, in the acknowledgement area, you will have found at your desk, commissioners, this year's award from the city, thanking you for your volunteering for the city. As always, that's a critical thing, that our citizens be involved in government and that they assist in the governance of the city, and know that the city very much appreciates your work, and this is just merely a token of their appreciation. And with that, then we'll move into action items. Next, old business. First is a chance to do a final wrap-up on the Trash or Treasure program. Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the request of the SWAC last month, we and Councilman Milam, we expanded out the survey on social media and blasted it on our methods to get a little bit more community input. It added about 115 respondents to the survey. We were still at 89% of the respondents participated in the event, so a few people commented on it that did not respond. Again, we're still overwhelmingly positive. 95% of the new respondents plan to participate in the event in the future. What we found a little bit interesting was only 20% of the respondents actually explored for treasures. They put stuff out, but only 20% of the people actually went and looked for additional items for themselves. I found that very interesting. Another interesting thing to note was only 9% of the respondents, or 28 people, actually watched the live event. So it is definitely good to note that perhaps the live event didn't reach quite as many people as we were hoping for. Otherwise, I would say 90% of the respondents enjoyed the event, and overall it was a very successful event to both those who signed up and apparently the community at large.
Thank you, Tom, for that information. Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments on the information that Tom has presented? Very good. In that case, Tom, thank you for everything you did to go ahead and pull this together. I know this is a crucial pivot for the event, having been just a few neighborhoods that we tried to pull together, and now it's a citywide event. So I imagine a lot of this is going to be coming out of staff as opposed to the work as a subcommittee here within the commission. So please ask us for the help that you need. If you need people from the commission to volunteer to help going forward, of course, that's appropriate. But thank you for what you did on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The next item under old business was a return to the recycling rate adjustment discussion that we had last month. Dave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. Good afternoon. So we're back to talk about the recycling processing fee that the request came through Republic Services. They sent the city a letter on May 17th, in which you guys all heard from Republic Services at the last SWAC meeting in May. So I know that staff and council both want to hear SWAC's input on this issue. And additionally, council's also interested in the survey, which is another agenda item on here, but the survey feedback, and hopefully that's something timing-wise that fits within this as well. Quick couple of facts, just to go over kind of where we're at. Republic shared the information on their losses on the recycling side. We as staff have gone through those numbers. We've worked back and forth with Republic and have looked at the numbers. Logically, they do make sense, and using numbers from July to June, which is what we agreed upon last year. We did the same thing again this year, using the same run rate from July to June, those numbers, utilizing actual household accounts as well. The rate on the residential side looks to be 10 cents per household. The rate on the commercial side is 32 cents per account. Now, moving into what does it mean to do? Again, I think contractually, staff are still concerned, still see within the contract that we are not required to accept this request under the contract provisions from a staff perspective. And we're not required to absorb the cost if that's the position. However, we know the recycling markets are a challenge. They have gone down. They've continued to stay down. I think it's fair to say that year one being last year, they took a nosedive. Year two, they're still going down, but not at quite the same rate. And there are some fluctuations back and forth with, I think it's weekly, you'll see new information about various markets going up and down and getting worse or getting better or flattening out. So I think it's again, it's a commodity market and these things are ever changing. With that, it's tough to see an end in this process right now from a staff perspective on where do these requests stop. Is this something that we're going to see every year from here on out? And should we be aware of that? And what should we do? What can we do to try and slow that down? That being said, we also know that we have the survey information that we are currently working on with our community, that we're currently working off of, excuse me. That survey data is from 2000, but with that data and with the data that we have currently on the Hefty Energy Bag program, on solid waste, social media feedback, we do think that there's general support, and we agree that there's support for the recycling programs at this time. That's what we found last year, and we've continued to see that working off that data that we do have. So there's general support in the community, seemingly, for a recycling program. So that's where we are. we've looked at the numbers, the math makes sense. We do have concerns contractually whether or not we're responsible for this, but we would like your input. I know last year we recommended adopting the fee increase and moving it forward. We still have time in the calendar as far as the fee process goes. We will see the CPI component of the rate increase request. The CPI gets published in mid-July, so we'd hope to be able to report in the July SWAC on what the overall CPI request looks like from our public services. With that, we would still have time in the months of August and September to publish and get the fees in line with an October 1 adoption date, regardless of what's decided upon. So maybe with that, I'll leave it open for discussion at this point, for input, questions, and we can go from there.
Members of the commission, do you have questions or comments on the information that David has presented to us?
I guess so. So we're talking about kind of the variable cost from year to year on the commodity market. And you kind of mentioned a request for adjustment this year and last year. Is that uncommon, or I know, or does it make sense for those sorts of things to become a annual item that gets adjusted on purpose, like it's a planned?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Nelson, it's a fair question. When this issue came up last year, it's the first time it's come up. Hey, we're having, the recycling markets are having trouble on the processing side, and there's losses being incurred by various parties. That's the first time we had that discussion last year. So what we chose as a group last year was to move forward with a one-year request to address that and to see what happens with the recycling markets. We're now a year later. The recycling markets are still sort of seeing the same downtrend. Is it as steep as it was a year ago? No. Is it still going down? Yes. There's still enough concerns on staff's perspective as to whether or not, when is the end in sight of these types of losses, these types of requests to recoup these losses, that it makes us hesitant to say, build it into just an overall request, keep them separate and whole so that we can see what's happening to that component of the market. Again, that's our perspective, and certainly looking for your feedback on that aspect, as well as being able to take that information to council and reporting to them. So I don't know if that answers your questions. In a nutshell, we still see it that an annual process of handling this component of the fee, the processing for recycling alone, is appropriate at this time, because I think it's still too new to see what's happening with trends in the market.
Yeah, it seems reasonable to me that there's an annual discussion or adjustment for the uncontrolled variable cost. I know where I work, there's that fixed cost that goes from year to year, but there's also an annual adjustment based on, nobody knows the snowpack and power generation, those sorts of things from year to year. So there is I'm used to having that variable cost kind of have a intentional adjustment. Mm-hmm. It sounds like it's a new concept here, or it hadn't had a need until the last couple of years, right?
Commissioner Nelson, yeah, for this issue, it's a new need.
Yeah. I don't have an answer. I'm just thinking out loud. But it seems reasonable to me that it'd be an annual going forward until there's a solid market for recyclables.
So, Mr. Chair, we're kind of following on then, that it's not unreasonable, it's not impossible, I guess. Some future date when markets improve, then you could see that cost come back down again. I mean, if it really is fluctuating from year to year based on what the actual costs are. Seems unlikely, but it's not impossible.
Right. So I'm sitting here thinking that it's, on the one hand, you don't want to expect your franchisee to absorb all the volatility, but you also don't want to surprise the taxpayer every year who's paying it. So what's the balance?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, and commissioners, I think that's one of the things as a staff we struggle with is at what point do you see, and what type of improvements do you see on the franchisee side to make an effect change on that end? I think last year was just so new to us that what we saw was an ability to at least try something new and see what happens with the markets. But what are the improvements that can be made on the processing side to maybe improve the recycling efforts so that we're not facing such high processing costs on the change any year to year? And that's something we haven't seen yet. I know we're all struggling with this as much as possible, but we have increased education and outreach on our end. We know we have work to do on contamination side. I think that's a national trend, as you can see, that contamination is always a challenge. However, what can be done on the processing side to solve that contamination as well? Those are questions that we still have.
Members of the commission, I would presume that staff would appreciate it to hear our thoughts on how we want to have this presented this year. Four possibilities I have heard were that one of them would be to go ahead and accept an increase in the processing cost, probably as staff has reviewed it and figured out what it needs to be, and that could be an adjustment to the rate sheet that is presented to us next month, which would then be placed before council for consideration of renewing the agreement for another year or make it a standing thing going forward. Certainly, there's another one is to not agree to any increase in rate. And obviously, that has not been discussed much and could lead to the need to go ahead and suspend recycling, for all I know. I know if Meridian chose to not reimburse costs, I think we do have it on record that Republic would, at that point, not be delivering material. Well, I take that back. We don't have any of that kind of information. That would likely lead to discussions about whether recycling would continue. And it seems to me there's maybe a fourth option, but regardless, do commissioners feel like they want to go ahead and address this issue individually and then and direct staff exactly where they want to go on this? Or do they want to just talk about it generally to identify to staff how it should be reflected on the rate sheets next month?
And Mr. Chair, if I may, yes, you're correct. And to add to that, I think that generally a position from the SWAC as to, is recycling still supported? And if so, that leads towards the first option of accepting the request. Or is there a lack of desire to or seeing the value in that, which I have not heard, but certainly willing to hear whatever it is you as a commission have to say. And then third, as you said, do you keep them separate as a separate component discussion, but also talk about the things that are coming down the road, like the survey. We know there's work being done at the county landfill with the cost of service. That's another major component to what happens in the grand scheme of solid waste. We know we have with our new solid waste coordinator being on board, and Tom, he's doing a program review, and we anticipate getting in front of you and in front of council with sort of a larger picture. So I think to your point about keeping them separate, is that something that you choose to do? Those are kind of the three things that I see related to the options.
Mr. Chair, I would just assert that the role of our committee is to encourage the recycling. I mean, we're here to reduce the landfill impact, and that I think, my opinion would be that even if we have to kind of run at a financial loss for a few years until the markets adjust, or the behavior of packagers and other things, it's just how long the community's willing to do that. But I think at this point we should proceed as if that's the goal, is to keep recycling in everybody's mind, but I would rather talk about it more as a whole than individual, and kind of the bigger picture.
Well, I would echo all of those things. I mean, I think it's helpful as a citizen to kind of see the whole picture, and certainly complicated, but if you say, well, it costs too much to recycle, I'm just gonna stop doing it, then, you know, as you push that, then your landfill cost goes up, so you know, it's an opportunity to try and deliver a really complicated message to the households about, you know, what they can do in terms of less contamination and using less, and so I'm in favor of continuing recycling and trying to present the whole picture as well. Do we feel comfortable that if contamination went down, that we would see that, those costs, that downward trend in costs start to level off? I mean, you know, level off. I mean, I know that's a hard question to
Sure.
answer, but.
Yeah, and Commissioner Larson, I'd have to ask Republic to chime in. They're the experts in the world of the recycling processing, and what they're seeing today may be able to give you some clue on the answer to that.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Larson, yes, the idea would be that if we saw a contamination drop, we would see the overall cost of recycling drop, because a huge component of what we pay monthly is disposal. So right now, we're seeing about 13 to 15% contamination, with 5% actually making it through into the bale commodities, but the other, 8 to 12% even being pulled out, and then that waste is baled and put into roll-off boxes and taken to the Ada County landfill. So the slower we fill up those boxes at Western Recycling with trash, the fewer hauls we have, and the lower our disposal costs are. So it would definitely have a positive impact on pricing over there.
But also provide cleaner commodity to sell, correct?
That's right.
So, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think what I'm getting at is sort of, idealistic, but the community is in favor of recycling. They don't want to see that service go away, and so they'd have buy-in to what they could do better, I would think. They would want it to be successful, and, here's the risk. If it's used in this manner, it's not sustainable, so here's what you can do as a household.
And Commissioner Larson, to that point, the next, we have an upcoming newsletter, just that quarterly newsletter coming up, and we could even include the current cost of recycling is 10 cents more per month. And, this fee can be controlled or reduced by being more careful with what goes in a recycling bin and reducing contamination, and just sharing that information and saying, this is a current additional cost. The emergence of domestic markets was anticipated to take between 2 and 5 years. So as far as how long this could go, I would assume it's 2 to 5 years before we see domestic markets emerge that will absorb what was historically being sent to Asia. So that's at least the time frame that we're looking at. We're starting to see old paper mills opened, and here materials being actually sorted here and then sent over to China. So there's a Chinese company that's come over here and opened domestic mills here just to get their hands on the material and start sorting it here and then sending themselves cleaner commodities. So we're starting to see that. It's not taken a toehold nationwide, but we're starting to see new businesses now open up. So I think that we're seeing starts to that, but we haven't seen an overall comprehensive answer for all recyclables yet.
Mr. Chair. Megan continuously points out, don't purchase it if it's a one-time use. Don't. And so that it gets down to the education aspect and the component that we don't necessarily have in place. And so I like this conversation, but the key is education. And I don't think we're there yet.
Mr. Chair, I mean, I agree, it's all part of that same message. The number one thing you can do, reduce, and
Mr. Chair.
don't use those water bottles. They don't end up in the bins.
Councilwoman.
So I just got back from a trip to San Francisco, and they are all still recycling everything. And maybe Rochelle can answer this, but I'm assuming that's because they actually invest in equipment that can sort the product properly, and that's the question. But to that point, I think we need to be pushing Western Recycling to invest the money into equipment instead of just paying people and then to hand pull all this stuff off and then charging us, and then that's going back to the taxpayer.
So, Mr. Chairman and Councilman Mylum, we actually met with David and Tom. We actually met with staff to discuss this. We did have a recent meeting with Western Recycling to ask them about, I think that's even on the agenda, to talk about technology upgrades. The hard part is they talked about the investment that would be, $600,000 to $800,000 for a piece of equipment. And with markets depressed, the return on investment is not there. So we would get cleaner commodities and better sorted commodities, but it would still be more expensive than where we are right now, is what we've been told. So I think I understand what you're saying, and yes, we have, MRFs in different places in the country, and they have technology to pull more materials out, like optical sorters and different screen sorters, but what we have here is they're in a kind of a tough position, I think, because they're saying that they're losing money, and to make this investment, they would have to pass the cost on to us, and the value of the commodities recovered wouldn't offset that investment. So,
Okay, but they're already spending the cost on us.
right.
And they would not have to have as many employees hand pulling this stuff. So there is, I don't buy that whole package. The return on investment might take a little longer, but if the market is going the other direction, that's gonna change. But there will be some immediate impact change based on employees, which are the most expensive thing a business has usually. So, well, not when you're talking about that kind of equipment. But the point is, it wouldn't be the entire, if there's $800,000, they're gonna be able to compensate that with probably a few $100,000 in employees that they're passing on to us
So would it be possible?
every year.
Would it be possible to have them come and give us a presentation? I mean, they've given us a presentation and, we're sort of always over a barrel. So maybe it would be best if they came and explained the cost, like the types of equipment they're looking at and the cost of each piece of equipment and this labor savings. For us, every time we run the numbers, they show it to be more expensive even. But I see what you're saying, and we've had that discussion, but would it be possible to get them on the next agenda, maybe to do a presentation? To do a walkthrough?
And the other thing is, I wouldn't even mind paying the extra 10% or 10 cents if we could recycle the stuff that we're throwing in the trash can. I mean, we're paying more and more every year, or we're recycling less and less. And that's why we have the contamination. But if we had the proper sorters that could pull that stuff out, we could be putting water bottles in there, and all of this stuff that is just filling up the landfill and destroying our earth. And then I wouldn't mind so much paying 10 more cents every year. Paying more for less, that just gets frustrating. Okay, I'm done, sorry.
Members of the commission, I'll go ahead and check with you. I assume that probably is a good recommendation that you would like to hear from Western Recycling on their situation and their ability to provide more services and such. Am I kind of guessing correctly?
Correct.
Sure.
Okay, well, I will work with staff and we'll go ahead and figure out how we can get them to come over here and update us. I know there's a good amount of time next month that's necessary for the CPI adjustment, so maybe it's July, but if not July, then definitely August, so.
And Mr. Chairman, maybe one question we can ask is what kind of sorters they send the plastics to. So I know that our 1 and 2 plastics are baled together and then sent to another MRF where they're further separated. And so maybe we ask them what types of equipment are needed. Plastics really, when they are separated, do have a lot of value. So maybe we ask them what types of sorters are being used in Salt Lake City or other places where our baled plastics are being currently sent and sorted. And maybe those are the investments we look at making here.
Good recommendation. Members of the commission, do you have further comments or questions or motions on how you would like to direct staff to go ahead and proceed?
I just like the idea of hearing directly from Western Recycling, and then if we could have more of that discussion on our Do we need to have that presentation before we finish the conversation about whether we're willing to pay the 10 cents? But I was just going to check, so if I understood it right, Western, if they have some equipment that might cost, did I hear 800,000? So it's if they can only reduce contamination from 15% to 5%, so how long does it take for that 10% difference to pay for itself on an $800,000 device? Is that kind of discussion?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Nelson. So I think that part of it, as if I heard Councilwoman Mylum correctly, she's just saying the things that are currently contaminants would be able to be pulled out and recovered in the plastics, because they are recyclable. The lightweight, number one, clamshells and water bottles, they are recyclable, but they could, flatten it into two-dimensional shapes, and they wind up in our mixed paper, and that's what downgrades our paper. So we really need to keep them out at this point. But like, for example, that seems to be what our biggest issue is in this valley. So maybe we look at what the sorter would be to pull out those lightweight plastics, like specifically that piece of equipment. And then I get what you're saying, you pay 10 cents more, but all this material gets to go back in your recycling bin. And so we recover more.
And employees.
And then fewer, I think they have, 16 to 20 employees on the line at any one time working. So maybe that would reduce headcount.
Wait, Mr. Chair.
Councilwoman.
I bring that up because they have specifically said that's why they're raising our rates. Last year, they said, because we had to hire more people because of your contamination to hand pick this out. So if they had a better sorter, they wouldn't have to have so many people. That's
And Mr. Chair, maybe to clarify another point that Commissioner Nelson made, I think the discussion around the rate increase or the requested increase of the 10 cents and the 32 cents is separate and apart from the discussion on whether or not Western can do anything in the next X amount of time with a new piece of equipment. The reality is that number is still being requested for the current state. And the decision process for a new piece of equipment would be, they quoted it's 6+ months out at minimum, when you consider engineering design, engineering installation, downtime, things of that nature. So they are two separate discussions, and so some direction on the fee component would be good as well. And one thing to note, we did, similar to last year, we worked with Republic. When we do this run rate, it's based on the July to June numbers. We do not have the June numbers yet, but you can do an easy calculation to do a run rate. So we did agree that when the June numbers come in, theoretically in the next week or so, we'll plug those numbers in. So we say it's 10 cents. It should still stay right at that, but it could change a few cents either way on both the residential and the commercial side when we get June's numbers to plug in. Instead of running an average of 12 months, we'll run actual 12 months. Because right now we're running 11 actual months and averaging to get to 12 months. We'll have full 12 months worth of data when we get in a week or so.
And Mr. Chairman and Commission, one interesting thing David just touched on was we've always been leery of downtime. Western has said if they order equipment, there's 6 months lead time before the equipment's delivered, and then they have to shut down their entire operation for several days and reconfigure everything and to add new equipment. And we've always been leery of that happening because there's no redundancy for us in what to do during that window. And we were actually in that situation just, what was it, like a week and a half ago, Western Recycling called us on a Tuesday afternoon and said that their motor went down in their baler and that they were going to work on it through the night, but they were going to be storing our material on the floor. And then by Wednesday morning, they said that they could not get their baler up and running and that they had overnighted a piece to come in Thursday and they would have it installed. But for the entire day Wednesday, entire day Thursday, they wanted all trucks directed to the landfill with recyclables. And so I actually called the landfill and made arrangements to get these truck numbers and route numbers that don't normally go to the landfill set up there. And then we just called, we have a really great working relationship with Pacific Recycling or Pacific Steel in Nampa, and they were fantastic, and they cleared the metal off their floor, and we directed all trucks over to their tipping floor in Nampa, which is right next to our facility in Nampa off of off the Garrity exit, and they just jumped in and they baled it and stored it in roll-off boxes, and we hauled it back to the Meridian Yard until Western was back up and running, and then we were able to take the recyclables there. So I think we have an option now that we don't have to entirely panic if they say that Western's gonna be offline for a while. We still have now a strategy to still recover those materials during that time.
And just to add to that, that's what item B3 is about, was the Western operations from a week ago. It's okay.
So, members of the commission, do you want to direct staff to go ahead and continue their number crunching and then just have this in a line item on the rate sheets that come back next month, at which time, well, I guess in parallel, we'll be having this discussion with Western, but anyway, that's the kind of direction that I'm kind of curious about. Is that what the commission is thinking at this particular point?
Affirmative?
I see 4 yeses here. So if staff would continue their work and roll in the June information and then work it up into the line item in the rate sheets showing the increase that has to come in for that. I know that's in the rate sheet, so.
Right. So Commissioner Corey, just to verify, roll that into what becomes the overall CPI request?
Yes.
Okay, great. We can do that for you.
Members of the commission, additional questions, comments on this to help staff? Very good, then we'll move on to the next item
Thank you.
on the agenda. And that is an update on the previously mentioned survey. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of the commission, we elicited your feedback in the previous meeting after sending you out the solid waste survey. We've taken your feedback and made some layout and formatting edits to the survey. Since the last time you've seen the survey, nothing substantive has changed on it, and it is now currently in final review, getting prepped to get sent out. If you do have additional feedback, we are more than open to hear that, and please submit it either now or via email.
Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments on Tom's presentation?
Mr. Chairman, I just have one. How are you sending it out, and can people respond multiple times?
It's going out through a third-party survey company, ETC. They also did the city survey for the mayor's office a little while ago. People can't respond more than once because they're tracking where the results are going to. So it's getting sent out to a statistically significant body, and then ETC is actually tracking where it goes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We look forward to the results.
Will you have those by July?
The next item on old business is cart placement ordinance update. Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. As you may remember, quite a while ago, we had some requests from several residents in the city about cart placement on sidewalks and cart placement issues that they had during service days. And we have been working for quite a while to get the ordinance language figured out. We've worked with several key stakeholders. We've taken a lot of feedback and input from different departments as to what would be required in the actual ordinance language itself to make sure that we covered all the bases and didn't really leave anything out. What you've got in front of you is the new ordinance language. It includes all the necessary requirements for carts to be placed curbside in the street to stay off of walking surfaces, covers several different layouts of different curb types, different residence types, where people, any situation we could think of to find where a cart would have any question about placement. It also mentions that in the event of one of the specifically mentioned situations that the resident would be requested to go with the service provider and what their guidance for placement is. for safe and efficient service. You'll also note with that you've got a fun little layout of the education and outreach piece that we've been developing with a third-party developer to make sure we get that message out to everyone so they can see what's going on and get the message consistently out to all the residents of the city.
Members of the commission, do you have any questions or comments on the information Tom that has just presented to us? Tom, if I might, at this point, I think we had previously floated the concept of if a homeowners association should choose something a little bit different, that there would be allowance for that decision by the homeowners association. Is that being reflected in the statement? If the franchisee designates a specific location for collection, then the wheeled carts must be placed in that location. And the intention is if a homeowners association would need to work with Republic Services if they wanted to choose something.
Yes, that was the kind of, if there's a specific situation that does not fit into this, we want to make sure we are able to accommodate situations where applicable.
Thank you. Members of the commission, questions for, or comments for Tom?
Mr. Chairman. So is this, you said this is a video? So it's not, you're not handing this out?
This is just a storyboard to kind of show you how the video will go.
Okay, I just want to make, because I'm looking at this and I'm confused already. And I understand how it should go.
It's just stills taken out of the video so that we can just show examples.
This is what, I'm like, what is this? This is wrong. And she's like, well, that's,
So put it in the street.
but it doesn't say not to do this, so as long as you don't hand this out.
No, that
without
is-
an X over this.
I will be stealing these back as soon as I can so they don't accidentally go out.
And she said, this is a movie, so I'm good with that. Thank you.
My only comment is I think it's a much better written ordinance, and thank you for
Yeah.
wordsmithing that for us.
Thank you. One other thing I wanted to point out, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, is you'll be able to see the video prior to it going out to the public. It's being created right now, and you'll get a preview of it before we start sending it out to the general public.
Tom, are we at the point where you need us to go ahead and act on the proposed ordinance to endorse going to council to it? Are you going to wait till you go ahead and show us the video and then we address all that? What's the timetable that we should be looking at this point?
At this point, I'd say we are all set to have the language approved to send to council. The video doesn't necessarily need to get approval to go to council because it's just an education component that goes with the language and follows the language in the ordinance.
Mr. Chair, I would move that we recommend that council approve the language in the ordinance as presented here.
Second.
If I may, of course, that we, with the maker's approval, that we forward the proposed ordinance amendment to the council for its consideration with the due pass recommendation.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Thank you. In the second, okay. So it's been moved and seconded that we, actually, I should say, give staff permission to go ahead and send this to the council for their consideration with SWAC's due pass recommendation. Is there further comments from staff, from commission on the proposal? My apologies, I am tripping all over my tongue. Dave?
Sorry to interrupt. This is a little bit of a learning process as we change our whole SWAC dynamic and makeup now that we have Tom on board. One of the key important notes is that we want to have your feedback on the stills, the video, and any education strategy that we use to get this out. So if you do have any feedback on that as well, continue to let us know. We're trying to time the ordinance with the video and the education component so that we don't just change the ordinance and say, hey, we changed the ordinance, and people go, what does that mean? At the same time, we don't want to just release a bunch of information that says, here's how it should be without changing the ordinance to make sure that we have a legal clause to justify that. So anytime you have any feedback, feel free to let us know on the education strategy, the outreach strategy, on the actual material, whether it's the video, the stills, or anything else that we do. So I just wanted to make sure you were aware of that.
And to that point, the first two things that kind of come to my mind that are really not much of an issue is then with the cart placement, of course, what we need to do is express the fact that carts would be at least 3 feet apart. And I'm sure that's in here, so I'm not, and then, of course, we've got a sloping curve that is the gutter. And so seeing vertical curb, knowing people, the public response. Those are two things I would mention, but those are in relationship to the video. And so going back to the proposal with us on our consideration, we were at forwarding this to the city council for its consideration when staff is ready to go ahead and present it with a due pass recommendation. Is there comments from the commissioners on the proposal? Or I suppose if you have some questions about, if you have some direction in relationship to the storyboard, the chair will indulge those comments too.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend that they add some dimensions. If they may not be showing it in the storyboard, but I think that they should, so that it also provides clear direction on where placement, how far away, et cetera.
Additional comments?
If they need an animation with the claw, let me know. I know where it's at.
Additional comments? Sensing the commission is ready for a vote, the motion on the floor is that the proposed ordinance be forwarded to city council for its consideration with SWAC's due pass recommendation at such time as staff is ready to go ahead and pass that to the council. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, nay? Thank you. Next on the agenda is a commercial glass recycling update. Rochelle, do you have anything on commercial glass recycling to?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, actually Conrad has something prepared if he wants to come up. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for your time today. I have with me a first copy, rough draft of our commercial recycling plan and outreach. If I can take a moment to pass these out.
You?
As you might notice, it's pretty straight and direct to the point, what we're trying to communicate. And it's offering our commercial glass recycling service. It looks a lot like the residential service, monthly pickup in most cases. I'll kind of go through that, the differences here in a minute. But for a subscription fee, that would be paid for by the customer. and it would be a separate container for glass-only bottles and jars. There are a couple of different service options. The minimum would be one 65-gallon cart picked up monthly, with the option to add up to 3 65-gallon carts picked up monthly. We will have available 3-yard dumpsters for glass-only customers, and service for that starts at monthly pickup all the way up to 3 times a week. The base price is listed here on the sheet, and obviously as you add more services, the price increases. And I do have a full list of that pricing matrix if anyone's interested. But I'd save you the boredom on going through each each service level. But we do have everything in between the 3-yard dumpster picked up 3 times a week down to once a month and once a month carts. So, just like the residential glass and the glass at the drop site, that will all actually end up together with the commercial recycling glass and sent to the regional facility and in Salt Lake and used in fiberglass applications. So it'll just go as part of that shipment that we're collecting right now and that we started 9 months ago. It explains here, only empty glass bottles and jars accepted, no lids, corks, Pyrex, windshields, anything out of the ordinary like that. Just your basic masonry jars and beverage bottles. So the plan would be to target those types of customers we think make most sense to have glass recycling, bars, restaurants, coffee shops, customers of those natures. Our customer service manager would be able to cast a net and get information on who they are in the city of Meridian, so we could mail them flyers and make personal visits offering this service to them. I have not been in talks with Meridian Utility Billing, but maybe there's an opportunity there to focus on billing inserts just to those types of customers we want to target for this service. It might also be a good idea to put stickers on the drop site for those that bring in their glass, and they might be commercial customers that would like this service, and it's not yet available, but it'd save them a trip in their day-to-day business to have a glass recycling cart or dumpster on site at their business. And it might be worth the $50 to have that there instead of making a trip 2 or 3 times a week to the transfer station. So I think it'd be wise to put a sticker on that drop site box saying, this is available to commercial customers now, and obviously residents if you don't already have one. So that's my plan to date. Any questions, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners?
And I should clarify, and this is proposed as a subscription service outside of the rate chart that we'll consider next month, correct?
I believe this has already been approved by City Council.
Mr. Chairman, it would be run outside of the franchise at this
Yes.
point, yeah, so, and if at any time the city decides to franchise it, then we can slide that over. I think that was the direction at this point in time, to leave it out.
Thank you. We were just talking about that, and we can certainly verify, and if it's not what we think it is, we can email you all and let you know, and if we have to bring it back for the following month, we can do that, but in conversation, we believe it's taken care of.
I'm pretty sure that we already approved these rates several months ago.
So members of the commission understand that this is information presentation so that you're aware of what's going on. With that, if you have comments or questions for Conrad, now's the time to go ahead and ask.
Mr. Chair,
Councilwoman,
Conrad, I think this is great. I do have a recommendation. When you're talking about the rates up here, somewhere, whether it's at the bottom or next to them, just you put that there are other rates available or other options. Because this looks like this is all you get. You get, this is your 3 choices. And you made it sound like there were many different options. It says customized, but that doesn't really tell me what I can do. So you don't have to list them all, but just say, you know, call for other frequency options or whatever.
Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman Milan, thank you. Yes, that's a good recommendation. I will be sure to add that to the next revision.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Oh, you know what you could do? Sorry, I had this idea when you're talking about at the drop site. You know how it may or might not. You know how realtors have those little plastic boxes with flyers for the houses? You could just stick these in there.
Yeah.
And then they're rain protected or whatever, and just, so if somebody's interested, they could. Except.
Another good idea.
But you want to I would label it commercial customers on the outside of the box so that you're not wasting a bunch of these with people taking them home and then realizing what it is.
Thank you.
members of the commission, additional questions or comments? Thank you, Conrad.
Thank you. And before I am done, I'd like to provide an update on the shipment of glass from the transfer station to Momentum. And we are close enough to 160 yards that we have ordered a truck to be sent to us to load up with glass. And we're thinking the week after July 4th, we will be
It's gonna fill it up.
we will have our maiden shipment out of here and probably invite you all to come see this 16-axle beast in motion. So anyway, I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
Mr.
Thank you.
Chair? Sorry, or
Commissioner.
Conrad or Rochelle, do you have a feel, is it pretty clean, like what you're getting from glass, or are people putting fish tanks and windshields?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Larson,
And look-
I myself haven't heard of any contamination that to be concerned about. Rochelle?
It's actually very clean. And we had some initial issues with contamination with the residential material coming in, like people were bagging it and putting it in, but we were able to, since we had a small number of customers, we just made phone calls and contacted them directly, and that was taken care of. So it's actually, the drop site material is really clean. So it's really nice, yeah.
Additional comments or questions? Well, thank you, Conrad.
Thank you.
That allows us to move on to new business, and the first item under new business is information regarding milk carton recycling. Staff, David.
He's tricking me. Thank you, Chair and Commissioners, and Conrad thinks he's going to sit down for a long time, but that's probably not the case. We said we would tag team this one. So we had a request, as you might recall, from a student about milk carton recycling at a local school. We met with the student, and we've had some conversations and done some research, and we're now kind of at the next step. What are the next best steps to take, and looking for your input and developing a path forward. We think we have an idea of what we'd like to recommend to you, and then have a discussion around it. There are some specifics that we did find out through the carton recycling program. I think it's Carton USA or something like that.
Carton Council.
Council, thank you. They require some specifics that cartons have to be empty and dry. The schools would need an extra container, and the container has some specifics around being open so as not to allow decomposition. Collection would have to occur on that same day repeatedly. Cartons are viable for about 3 weeks, we think, based on the research and the information we found once they're deposited in some sort of container. And the schools would need 20 tons before they would ship to a facility that can take this material. Western has agreed to bale and prep them for shipment and store them and wait for a coordination of a truck. And then the cartons would go to a facility in Denver for repackaging and reshipping out to a facility in the Midwest. So with all of that, we've discussed, there's a lot of complexity to it, but I think at the end of the day, there's a key driver, and that's the schools and the school district and the students and the teachers and the principals at those schools. This is a lot of information simply for us to absorb and research and find out. It has to get disseminated out to the schools. So we're in favor of supporting the idea, but I think at this point, we have to look to the schools to turn back this information to them and say, is this something you're willing to take on, either on a school-by-school basis or on a school district level, or maybe a valley-wide effort with, if you can get the two school districts, the Boise and the West Ada district talking together. That's kind of the range of steps we see how this program could go. But at minimum, if a school is not willing to have students be invested, have someone be kind of in charge of this effort, set up some facilities, set up some areas and processes to make sure that the necessary steps are happening so as not to wind up with another, poor contaminated or decomposing material. We think they have to have that conversation, and we can certainly assist with them, and that's where I was going. And I'll turn it over to Conrad, maybe if you have anything else to add, because I know Republic's certainly willing to coordinate and help in some of that regard, but we do need to buy in from the schools and the staff and the school district. So maybe I'll stop there.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Miles, thank you. Yes, he touched on a lot of the same points I was going to make. I will add that the schools, if they had an effort on it, that would be a huge part of it. And this is not my words; it's the Carton Council's words. But he did not believe that there would be enough to create 20 tons in that time span, at least not at this time. He mentioned that the Carton Council did that plant in Colorado is underway, under construction, and expect to be functional in 2020, and we should revisit it at that time. And their capabilities at this Colorado plant might be best suited for the amount of material we can generate and their capabilities to process things. And they might actually be able to take more than just cartons there. Could be mixed waste paper that would be included in that, or plastics. So I think to add to David would be, yes, let the schools try this out and see how much motivation and buy-in they have on their side, and it'd probably be worth looking at again later in 2020. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have right now.
So if I may, at this particular point, it sounds like the recommendation is to put this back in the school district's area to go ahead and consider whether it's possible for them to go ahead and actually collect this material in an acceptable fashion, and to figure out how to go ahead and get it delivered to market to these facilities if they can produce enough material that is acceptable. Seeing head shake, then we can consider this to be a information session at this particular point. Well, anyway, so members of the commission, do you have any comments or questions for staff or for Conrad on this subject at this time?
I just had, if you could just clarify for me, you say milk carton, are you talking about the single-use wax-coated cardboard, or what are you? It's been a long time since I've been inside a school.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Nelson, yes, it is. For a while there, the schools did go away to plastic balls. They moved away from the cardboard cartons and tried out the balls. And for this reason or another, they went back to the cardboard cartons. And they were wax lined with a, I don't want to get too much into the chemicals here because it'd just be over my head, but they were waxed with something that was absolutely not recyclable. But today's technology, what they're lined with is some sort of a layer that slushes off at some point. and is able to be removed, and now then at that point, it's cardboard again. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, if I might, and I would go ahead and say that those of us that were hit with this subject about a month and a half ago were pretty much gobsmacked. We had always thought that these were wax lined, and as it turns out, the industry has moved forward, and instead it's a plastic laminated to the inside of it. And so when it goes into the digester, it is possible for that plastic layer to slough off, and then they're able to go ahead and take that off as a waste liquid and that plastic, and the paper fiber can go ahead and be recovered for use. That's true of what we refer to as a Tetra Pak, that soup and juice are sold in the stores on too, that Mylar laminated layer is handled the exact same way. So all of us that were under the impression that there was a wax-coated paper, we've now come to understand that actually that's become a plastic laminated multi-layer container. So there is a huge push by the container manufacturers of this nation to go ahead and educate people on the fact that it is possible at some very specific locations for those types of containers to be recovered and recycled, but it takes some effort. So, yeah, this is news to us, and it's information being brought to the commission.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Conrad, there's a group, I'll call it a nonprofit, it may be just an individual that's recycling these things in Boise. Do you know what I'm talking about? They collect them at the co-op.
Mr.
And they
Chairman,
send them to
Commissioner.
Denver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commissioner Larson, there is someone that is in partnership with the co-op organization. They are separate, but they are having a partnership. The co-op has agreed to host this collection site, and then that individual collecting these is responsible for bailing and shipping to end markets, and I think it's the Midwest. But, oh, phew, I thought Rochelle just left. I did not have any luck getting a hold of that individual, but Rochelle Klein did, and I might ask her to add to that a little bit.
I had an email on it, I was trying to find it, I can't find it, but the reason I bring it up is maybe if this one kid at this one school wants to do a little test run and see how it is to collect the cartons and get them down to this person that's already doing it in Boise.
Mr. Chair and Commissioner Larson, that's a great suggestion, and I think for that element of my work, we did talk with the nonprofit that you're referring to, and once we gave them the quantity that the schools can generate, it was too much material for them to handle at the co-op. But certainly from maybe a school-by-school pilot effort, that might be a good opportunity to explore.
It might, and I guess before we commit to a large-scale project, to get a little information on how how into it the kids are in the school and how much of a mess it is and, whatever the issues might be.
We can carry that conversation forward. That's a great suggestion.
Members of the commission, additional comments or questions on the subject at hand? Well, thank you, Conrad. Thank you, staff. Continue onward, and we do appreciate
Thank you.
what you've done on that. Next on the new business is the household hazardous waste update. Commissioner Nelson, like I had mentioned, there was a mention on this last month that maybe it needed something, so I put it on the agenda, but I will leave it to you as to whether there's anything to really address in it.
Well, officially, I'll say that I have no new information, other than there had been some discussion at the last household hazardous waste meeting that there is an outreach plan going out, and that they weren't going to reach out to the cities like had been planned a few years ago, the last time we looked into this, But it sounds like maybe the city of Boise is kind of pressing on with a communication plan and I just haven't had any feedback or they haven't reached out to us, or at least to me at least, on any sort of or input or a plan going forward. So anyway, I was surprised to find that there wasn't more engagement. Sounds like the city of Boise has already got that's all hearsay to me. I haven't heard that directly from them.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, it's similar to what we heard. In fact, we were talking with the county shortly before this meeting, and they had indicated that Boise was moving forward with some level of their own effort as well. So we can check in. I have not made any headway on this, and Tom's not here, so I don't know if he's made any additional headway. We do know, as Commissioner Nelson said, that they were looking for a combined effort, sort of a renewed push in the marketing and education realm, and that's where we're at and working on that. So we can check in with Boise and we can check in with the county and go from there.
Mr. Chairman and Mark, I guess I wasn't at the last meeting, but they did say they would reach out to us as well for funding to help share the costs, and I know that proposal is out there coming. I haven't seen it yet either, so maybe we'll both get it at the same time, because I think there's value in having a regional message, because that program is really regional. I think there's real value in that. So I'll circle back with them and see where they are with that. And I'll bring, yeah. So you don't have any, you just know they're pushing for, but nothing's been developed yet. You haven't heard any PSAs or seen any commercials?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything. It's just that I heard today, part of this meeting, that the city might have started something, but I haven't heard any more. I guess the takeaway is that there is some work being done by the city, and then it just sounds like it's just in a kind of gray area right now.
Okay.
But if you see something out there, don't be surprised. Let us know what you hear.
Thank you, Dave and Rochelle, for following up on that request by the commission. Next on the agenda is the previously mentioned Western Recycling Operations update. Indeed, Rochelle, do you feel like there's anything more you need to go ahead and add to the previous discussion?
Maybe just some history so you're aware of what happened. I forget the timeline now. I think it was 2 weeks ago, early in the week, Western had let Republic know that their machine had gone down and was out of commission, and it would take, I think, a day and a half thereabouts to get the new part, get the part installed, get the machine back up and running. And in the meantime, as Rochelle mentioned, they wanted to take that material that was accumulating to the landfill. Republic Services reached out to us, and based on our contract and our desires to continue recycling seamlessly, we asked them not to take that to the landfill. And with that, Republic then, as Rochelle described, worked with another provider out in Nampa to make sure that material got stored, and that once it was stored and once Western had their parts back up and running, that material then returned back to Western for processing into the recycling markets. And I don't know if maybe you've got an update on that material actually going back?
Yes. Mr. Chairman, yes, the material's been taken back to Western and processed. So this month's, the June monthly report will have material that was taken directly to Western and some that was run through Pacific, because we are curious how many tons went through Pacific. So, but yes, all of that has since been taken back to Western. The bales were broken open and it's all been fed into their machine and sorted. So it worked out well. And like David said, I said, we just got this information, and the direction from Western was landfill, and David's like, let me know how you're going to avoid that. That was the email back. So anyway, it worked out well, and we're lucky that Pacific is a really good partner.
Members of the commission, questions on the information that's been presented? I would offer our thanks to Republic for going ahead and addressing this issue and facilitating, making it so that material wasn't wasted. With that, we'll move on to the next item, which is the SWAC ordinance language update. David?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission. Do you all have a copy of the piece of paper with the note at the top that says draft 6/5/19? You all have it. So this came as we were reviewing to make sure that when we revised the structure of the SWAC makeup back at the beginning of the year, we were going back through the ordinance to make sure that we had everything aligned. And one of the questions that came up was the question about technical members. And because the commission is now regulated, well, it always was, but now that the driver of the number of seats is the overriding city commission ordinance section that allows up to 9 commissioners, and because we removed 2 staff, there was a question as to whether or not it was desirable to have more than one technical expert position available to the SWAC commission. In other words, would you want another additional member that could serve in the capacity as a technical representative that didn't necessarily live in the city of Meridian? Because that's what we currently have, is that one member may be an industry expert. And what it said was that does not reside in Meridian. What we're suggesting is a conversation to you all. Does it make sense to allow more than one technical representative in your ideal world for the commission? And I think some of that is born out of the fact that sometimes we see the commission, not attendance, but the commission makeup go up and down, and we always want to make sure we have a quorum. We always want to make sure that you have sufficient support from the technical world as well. And so it's a question to you all as a discussion point. Does it make sense to change this ordinance to allow that to occur? And so what we suggest, if you are, is what's written is up to 2 members may be industry experts.
They live in Meridian.
This wouldn't require that. It's silent, exactly. And so the intent is that it simply be an industry expert. Sorry, I had to go back through that.
Mr. Chair, sorry. So
Let me, yeah, Councilwoman,
Sorry. You were going to say something?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, David, I just wondered, the overriding commission ordinance that you mentioned allows up to 9, does it require a certain minimum?
I can double check with legal, but it requires a quorum, which is generally 1/2 plus 1. So if you have 9, you have to have 5, or excuse me.
Could you have as few as 3, the 2 industry experts and the next person? Like, do you have to have at least 5 or at least 4 or, do you know?
Yes, so Commissioner Larson, the overriding ordinance allows up to 9, then the SWAC-specific provisions that are currently written are made up. The math works out to a minimum of 5 right now.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, it's hard to imagine, but that this would actually happen, but there could be a scenario where you'd have only the youth person being a Meridian resident, right? You could have 2 industry experts and a youth person, you have 3 commissioners.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Larson, as it's currently written, 1 member may be an industry expert, currently not Meridian. 1 Meridian resident shall be under 18, and all remaining members shall be Meridian residents. Shall be 2. Yeah, I guess as written, that's a good point. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I think in the commission ordinance, there is a minimum. I can't quote it, but I'm pretty sure it says no less than 5, no more than 9, or something like that, would be my guess. I can't imagine. We definitely need to, I think, verify that, because that's a good point. I guess, Dave, my question for you is, why do we need to even specify how many experts there can be? I mean, I'm okay with like 1 expert that doesn't live in Meridian. What if there's another expert that does live in Meridian? What if there's 5 experts? They all live at their Meridian residence and they want to volunteer on this commission. So, I mean, we have the Arts Commission and they're experts in art, many of them. So why would you limit or even have to call out how many people could be experts? I think the important part is the not living in Meridian part. And I think it's crucial that this commission is made up of Meridian residents. I mean, a lot of, you're dealing with recycling and trash, also fees and taxpayer dollars. And I don't know how comfortable I feel putting a whole bunch of non-Meridian residents on the commission. This is the first time I've seen it, so just throwing that out there.
Mr. Chair and Commission, and Councilwoman Mylum, thank you for the comment. I appreciate that. Number one, I don't think we're trying to limit the number of commissioners or Meridian residents. I think what the thought was, as these topics become more complex and become more intricate in terms of the impact of all the things that you mentioned, the fees and the programs and the things that are happening, is does the commission want some more expertise allowed? And by not clarifying, it's currently written that you can have one expert who's outside of Meridian. And yes, maybe there are experts that are in Meridian, and certainly they would apply and qualify to sit on the board. If there aren't experts, is that something that are in Meridian? Is that something the commission wants to have the flexibility to allow? And so that was the question we were posing to the commission and to you all.
Like Commissioner Neal currently does not live in Meridian City limits.
Is this coming, Dave, is this coming from a specific somebody that we're trying to recruit to the commission?
Not that I'm aware of, but I do know that we always get calls in from various people who say, what are the requirements to sit on various commissions? So I'm not aware of a specific person, but I do know that we've asked the question that if that happens, does the language allow for that?
I guess as long as there's 9 commissioners, that wouldn't bother me so much. But you have half of the commissioners and a youth member who doesn't pay taxes voting on what taxpayers should spend. Makes me a little nervous.
Councilwoman, I kind of echo your concerns, and I think it's the striking the language that does not reside. I don't think it's meant to say there's a limit on the number of experts, but the idea to sort of expand the pool where you could get those experts.
Sure.
You could bring them on to the commission. I think that's desirable, but it sort of seems to imply that no more than 2 experts, regardless of where they live. So up to 2 non-Meridian residents could be on the commission.
If they're,
provided
that they're experts in the field, yeah, something like that. I agree.
Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, can we possibly qualify it? So we say, if 5 or fewer commissioners, or, if there are 5 or fewer commissioners, up to 1 expert may reside outside, or greater, like, if we have greater than.
Or
5.
percentage.
Yeah, if we have greater than 5 commissioners, then we can have up to 2 experts. I mean, I see what you're saying, you don't want to top load with people outside the city limits, but maybe there's potential there to say, okay, if you have a small commission, 1 can be outside city limits, but if you have a big commission, then maybe 2 can.
Mr. Chair, Rochelle, I think that, I like the spirit of that idea, but you can imagine, I can imagine, some 2 commissioners suddenly resign, and then you have to boot one of your industry experts off because you now messed up the ratio. I mean, it is a risk, but one that I'd be willing to take, but I think the clarification is up to 2 non-residents, provided that they have expertise or something. I think.
I like that language better. And I guess it's up to chair, who decides how many positions are on, how many applicants you get and they're filled? Is that the mayor that does all that?
Yes, I've never been asked, so I'm going to guess that it probably is decided in the mayor's office.
I know that she gets the applications and goes through them. I assumed, bad assumption of me, that she would go over them with you, the chairman at least, but find out.
Chair, we can certainly answer that question and the question that Commissioner Larson raised about the minimum number, because I'm looking at the overriding commission section, and it does say up to 9, so I have to go back and double check with legal to find out, is there a minimum threshold that's limiting us somewhere that I'm not seeing? Because it's a good point.
But we passed a overall commission ordinance a couple years ago, and kind of redid some things with the numbers, and I'm pretty sure there's a minimum in there. And it's probably 5 to 9, but
That makes sense, and they're all consistent.
could be 7. Yeah, that's what the whole thing was, trying to make each commission consistent. But then we still had issues with this commission that was a lot just different with having staff on the commission, and so that's why we've had to go through all these changes, trying to correct that.
Mr. Chair, regardless, we'll double check that minimum item that talks about minimum numbers.
So I think it's understood that this will be continued till next meeting then. But at this particular point, if any of the commissioners have any additional comments for staff on the potential ordinance, they would certainly be appropriate at this time. Very good, then. Dave, thank you for bringing this in, and appreciate you doing the research on the questions that have arisen on this.
We'll bring you back some answers next time.
Okay, with that, we've completed all the actions that are on the agenda for our consideration. The next meeting would be July 24th. I have in my notes that I will make an attempt, well, first off, the primary action at that point will be the CPI rate sheet presentation and for its consideration for 2019. And I have on my list, now I guess, Dave, would you like me to go ahead and reach out to the deans, or would you like to reach out to the deans to see if they would be in a position to present to us?
Whichever your preference is.
Can I delegate it to you?
Sure can.
Thank you. Thank you for calling them, but as I say, if you want, you can go ahead and delegate it back.
Appreciate that.
And then I guess we'll have to take a look at that, depending on how complex the CPI rate adjustment becomes. We may have to push that till August, but hopefully we can do both of them next month.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Talking about scheduling and the CPI conversation and the rate adjustment, it might be one thing to at least put in the back of your heads for the August meeting, if there's a need to shift based on the need to get in front of council, we backdate an October 1 effective date. Sometimes I know that there's Labor Day stuck in there, and I don't know if council will adjust their schedule or not at this point. But at least be willing to consider whether or not I lost the calendar, but the third Wednesday of August for your August meeting might be something that's needed. Otherwise, I don't anticipate a problem, but just something to be thinking of as the CPI information comes in, being able to process it and get it in front of you in July, and also being able to have a decision and recommendations in August timeframe so that we're prepared to meet the fee schedule calendar for effective date purposes. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you for that warning. And Mr. Chairman, if I can also add, Mike McGurdio has got a presentation, I think, on composting with Timber Creek, and I don't know if we can add that to the next agenda or if we can get an update from him in between. It looks like he's got some good information to share, so it might be good to bring that forward.
Noted. We need to go ahead and take a look at, because I don't want to,
I know.
I've already, once again, blown the hour intended for our meetings, and we've gone an hour and a half. I don't want to go ahead and overload the commission. Because we opened this up with thank you for your volunteering your time, and we don't want to take advantage of it. So noted that we need to go ahead and look at composting, and we'll see when we can get it in here. We also would be up at the point for the next quarterly report, so I'm not sure how much of that would actually be done during the July meeting or how much of it's going to have to be continued to the August meeting. It's a lot of stuff to do.
Would it be possible for him to send information like pre-reading for us, if it's a lot of information? Is that possible? Or like a pre-packet or for?
Like a movie.
Like maybe not a movie, but just information.
Thank you. Let me, yeah, well, that's always a possibility too. If people feel like they, as members of the commission, again, we are open to go ahead and get all the information we need. Let me run this by staff so we can go ahead and make sure that we load it appropriately and don't overload the commission. Any other subjects that people have been thinking of that we need to go ahead and throw in the hopper?
Got a few. I'm just kidding.
Well, as always, if those do come up, or you want to go ahead and just do those through side channels, contact Dave or myself. And with that, I will go ahead and call the meeting adjourned. It is 5:31. Thank you for that.